Oh, what's checking, everybody? It's another edition of the Orange Bloods Texas Football Channel. I'm Geoff Ketchum, joined by Anwar Richardson. We're talking about rankings today. So hit that like button, subscribe to the page if you haven't already done it. We've got content coming out of all areas over on the Orange Bloods channel. Check it all out. Players, breakdowns, analysis, interviews. It's all there. And Anwar, we spent so much time on Monday overreacting to basically the quarterback conversation that we didn't get into the fact that the AP Top 25 was released on Monday. Texas Longhorns ranked number 21. Your initial thoughts on where the Longhorns slot into the early national rankings?
I thought they might be a little bit higher, Catch. I thought they might be at least within the 20s. At 21, the teams that they're ahead of, Catch, as I look at it, it's Coastal Carolina, Louisiana, who they play in the season opener, Utah and Arizona State, behind, some other programs like an Iowa, Indiana it was ranked ahead of them. So it's interesting to see the national perspective, right? Because we always deal with the local perspective and Texas perspective on it. But the national perspective, it's almost like they just, they threw in Texas because it's Texas. But not the ton of respect you would want, Steve Sarkisian to get in year one, where you think like automatically people would be on board. I think that there is a as you yawn. I think
that's the first time that's happened in one of these. That tells you. I just told you I'm dragging a little bit, and then out comes the yawn. Sorry, it wasn't personal.
You would think, but you would think that there would be a little bit more of a first year bump of like, hey, everyone's totally sold, but. But to be, 21 is probably just about fair for what you and I expect when we start thinking about at the end of the day, like how many wins. And within the next couple of weeks, we'll reveal, our win totals. But it's probably fair.
Yeah, look, I feel like once you get beyond the top, I want to say 10, but maybe it runs a little deeper than that. Maybe you can go into Oregon, Wisconsin, Florida, all of these teams that are 11 through 25 either had major issues a year ago, and like LSU's ranked 16th. I don't know what happened that put LSU in the land of the ranked after the season that they had a year ago. I don't know. Like, I don't know where Texas belongs. They finished 19th a year ago. This team isn't as good as it was a year ago. They're trying to replace left tackle. They're trying to replace Joseph Osai. They're trying to replace Sam Ehlinger. It's not quite there yet. I don't really have an issue with where Texas is ranked in the beginning. I've seen them ranked higher. I haven't really seen them ranked lower. 21 feels like about the basement for where Texas has been ranked nationally going into this season. Look, it's hard not to notice that Louisiana is 23rd. That's the first game of the season. And quite frankly, if Texas wins that game and does so in impressive fashion, they won't be 21 for long. They'll probably be close to the top 15. They'll be rewarded for a schedule that sees them play a ranked team early on. And then when we look at the rest of the rankings, Oklahoma is second. That really puts into perspective the mountain that Texas has to climb this year, and that the preseason expectations for the Sooners are that they'll be in the playoff at this point. Iowa State at 7. And then there's, the lack of respect in the Big 12 really comes out in these rankings, because you've got OU at 2, you've got Iowa State at 7, and then there's nobody until Texas comes in at 21. And then even when you look at, I guess, in the receiving votes category, Oklahoma State would have been 26th, TCU would have been 28th. And I guess that's it for the Big 12. West Virginia got a few votes as well, but by and large, the rankings reflect what it feels like everybody thinks about the Big 12's hierarchy going into this season.
Yeah, you're right. Because I was looking, you're right. Oklahoma State got votes. TCU received some votes. Yeah, you're absolutely correct. I have a question. Iowa State at 7. You buying that?
I mean, the thing is, they return everybody. What did they last year? They finished just outside the top 10, right? So, I mean, it's an Iowa State team. I don't know that they're actually better than Texas. I don't. But I know that they are a more stable program in 2021 than Texas is. They're not breaking in coordinators. They're not breaking in a new head coach. They're not breaking in a new quarterback. They too have an All-America candidate at running back. I mean, on paper, Iowa State's better than Texas. If we forget about recruiting rankings and we just look at what has happened in college and what happened a year ago, Iowa State deserves to be ranked ahead of Texas. Texas is ranked 21st. That feels like that could be a little bit on the low side. We're probably quibbling a little bit. Like I might have Iowa State a little bit lower, but they feel like a team worthy of being a preseason top 10 at this point, given that they're the most experienced returning team, I think, in the history of the Big 12.
Yeah, no, I would definitely probably, yeah, I mean, the teams that they are ahead of, Cincinnati, Notre Dame, North Carolina, which, golly, Mac Brown. I love the resurgence that, he's having and the fun. Listened to him on an Andy Staples podcast a few weeks ago, and it was just really interesting dialogue and conversation that they had. 21 seems about right, Ketch. The Iowa State is there at 7. What do you think? I mean, that would reflect your Big 12 rankings too, right? Oklahoma 1, Iowa State 2, and 3. One of the last things I'll ask, do you see a scenario where Texas finishes second in the Big 12, that they surpass Iowa State this season?
Sure. I mean, I can envision scenarios. It's hard to get to that point now. I mean, we're talking about a Texas team right now that none of us really know what they are yet as a team, but as camp goes along, the offense is still trying to figure itself out. Neither quarterback is in a world where the competition at quarterback is not like having neither quarterback's having a great camp, but the other guy's not either. And it's hard to, it's when I look at Iowa State, if that game's in Austin, yes. I've said this before in the YouTube shows that we've done. That'll be the most important home game potentially in the history of Iowa State football when Texas comes to town. If Texas is a true number 3 team in the Big 12, when that game gets played, you're going to have all of these seniors that game's November 6th. I don't know what Iowa State's going to be ranked when they come into that game yet, but if it sticks to kind of the narrative, I guess, right? So they play and they don't even play Oklahoma until 2 weeks after Texas. Mm-hmm. So it's possible, very possible, that that's an undefeated Iowa State team, certainly in Big 12 play, right? Like they've got a home game against Iowa early in the season. Iowa's a preseason top 25 team, ranked ahead of Texas. They always seem to lose by a field goal to Iowa, no matter how good or bad the teams are. Like that's a game they've had a hard time winning. But when that Texas game rolls around, the justification for every decision that every Iowa State player that decided not to go pro, to come back for another year, that's one of those games that will determine just how right of a decision that those players made. It's easily the most important Big 12 home game they have all season. They play in Norman 2 weeks after that game. Just hard for me now to think Texas goes into Ames and wins that game because Iowa State's an older, more established, more mature football team at this point. Maybe by November 6th that changes, but it's hard. It's a real leap of faith, I think, to think that a Texas team that has a lot of question marks figures it out and jumps ahead of a team that has very few question marks at this point. We could talk about whether or not Iowa State is legitimately elite, but they don't have personnel questions. They aren't asking questions about who steps in and makes plays. It's just a completely different conversation that was taking place in Austin right now. But yes, I can envision a world. Look, Texas will have more raw talent, I think, on the field when they play Iowa State, but they did a year ago too. And we don't know yet whether or not this Texas team is better than it was a year ago. All we have is speculation. At worst, Iowa State's even with where they were a year ago, and they were really good when it was all said and done. They had a really good season. I'm not here to hate on Iowa State, I guess.
No, I mean, that makes sense. I mean, they've got the quarterback that's coming back. They've got, arguably, I know Texas fans won't hear, but they got arguably one of the best running backs in the conference. Not saying Breece Hall is more talented than Bijan, and I think Bijan probably ends up, being a high draft pick, in another year or so. But you can't knock 1,500 yards, of on the ground. I don't know how many he had receiving. Great tight end that they have there, good defense. So I mean, you're right. And then Ketchum, I did look at the schedule. I mean, UNI, like you said, Iowa comes second after that. But then after that, they got UNLV, Baylor, Kansas State, Oklahoma State. That's in Ames. Then they're at West Virginia. Like you said, all that before they hit Texas. To your point, if they get past Iowa is the toughest early opponent before they start getting into, Texas and OU. And those are only two games outside of Iowa. You say, what are the three losable games for this team this year? Iowa, Texas, and then, the OU game, later in the season. So, I'm with you. I think if Texas somehow surpasses Iowa State this season, this would be one of my final thoughts, Ketch. If they pass, it's because Sarkisian came in and had a coaching impact and was able to do a lot of the little things that maybe weren't done previously. And if he's doing some of the little things that weren't done previously, it takes this team from good to great. Then that's what's going to be. If it's a little bit of a repeat of last season or marginal increases and marginal gains, but not substantial gains rather, then we're still talking about a team that's the third best team in the Big 12. But if they get the quarterback going, and Sarkisian has the effect on quarterbacks that he's had in his career with Bijan and Ketch, I think it's safe to say that we might see a heavy dose of Bijan early in the season just to take some pressure off the quarterback. I think you've got to that point. 20 is probably the minimum that you want him to have to take that pressure off him. The tight ends are really good. And if the defense just doesn't do some of the crazy things that we've seen over the last couple of years, which is blow big leads, then I think they're fine. The only thing, Ketch, I want to say this. This will be my last thing. The only thing that really concerns me about the defense is that the one thing they are stressing a lot is turnovers and how to knock the ball loose. The only thing that concerns me about the defense is the tackling portion, because sometimes when it's all about knocking the ball loose, we saw that a lot with Charlie. The guys trying to knock the ball loose, the guys weren't taking guys down to the ground either. So if Kwiatkowski makes sure there's a good balance in there, then I can definitely see, Oklahoma and Texas as a 1-2 finish.
I think ironically, I think the key to a Texas 1-2 finish with Oklahoma and getting to the Big 12 championship game is going to be the quarterback position at Texas, kind of like you mentioned. I am not the biggest Brock Purdy fan in the world. I think he's okay. I think he's a really nice college quarterback, but I've seen him mentioned as a potential NFL guy. And it's hard for me not to realize that when you look at his season last year, through the first 8 or 9 games, he only once played at a quarterback rating level that was on par with what Sam Ehlinger was doing. I'm looking at his game log from a year ago. He was awful against Louisiana at home in the opener. You want to know how they lose by 17 points to Louisiana? He went for a 74.8 quarterback rating, which is horrible. It's horrible.
Mhm.
And that's not good in the NFL, where 100 is like the standard bar for really great play for quarterbacks in the NFL. When 200 is the number that OU quarterbacks are putting up. And look, to give you an idea, against West Virginia, final home game of the season, he had a 220 quarterback rating. And then against Kansas State towards the end of the year, he had a 228 quarterback rating. So when Brock Purdy's really good, he can have elite moments. But he had there's just too many. He had a couple of games last year where he was sub 100. And in both of those games, his team lost. I mean, when his team lost games last year, Iowa State, it was because he had a 74.8 quarterback performance, a 99.7 quarterback performance. And against Oklahoma, he was 128.4. In the bowl game, they win against Oregon, but he was only 125.5 in that game. He's just okay. Now, if there's another level that Brock Purdy can get to, then Iowa State will play in the Big 12 championship game. But if Brock Purdy finishes this season with a 142 quarterback rating, which is lower than the quarterback rating by about 12 points that Sam Ehlinger had, then I think Iowa State's beatable. And it will probably come down to that game in Ames. And can Texas, against one of the best teams on its schedule, play one of its best games of the season on the road in an environment that will be gassed up? I mean, these are questions that we've got months to answer, but I think these are the questions.
Hey, you nailed it. You got nothing more for me.
Hit that like button, because we talked about rankings today. Hey, we are making chicken salad. Trust me. We didn't talk about the quarterbacks today.
Not a lot.
We'd go for an hour. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. We got more content coming all week long. For Anwar, Richardson, and myself, we'll see you later. Take care of each other. Peace.